Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and to all of you, welcome to the most transformational workshop at the conference. I want to start with something that happened about 3 weeks ago. I was working with my residents and training them about spirituality and applying it to clinical care. And one of the residents says, well, what if they're not spiritual? I thought about that and I said, okay, one of the things you work with in trying to accomplish with your clients is you want them to be happy, right? Sure. Well, what if they're not happy? That's it? You're done? Spirituality is the source of happiness. And that's what I hope that by the time this workshop is done, you will see how it is the core of happiness. And I also want to find out am I speaking to the choir when it comes to spirituality? How many of you consider yourself to be spiritual? Whatever you define. Okay, so I've got half a choir. I hope we will teach the choir a new song today a little bit, and the others will have to learn the song. We need a new field, and I refer to the field as applied spirituality. And just for information, I've started writing about it, and I've written in 3 areas. One has to do with spirituality in religion, one has to do with spirituality in adolescence, and one has to do with spirituality and therapy. You don't have to remember the titles. However, if you Google Chatlos and spirituality, you'll get the religion one. If you Google Chatlos and adolescence, you'll get the adolescent and identity one. And I finally succeeded in getting my name in the Google world associated with Freud. So if you Google Chatlos and Freud, you'll get the one about psychotherapy. An accomplishment. These are the formal objectives for the workshop today. You will be able to identify characteristics of spiritual experience and of a spiritual core. Describe the role of self-worth and dignity as a core of spirituality and spiritual experience, and explain how understanding of brain function is used clinically for emotional healing. And the title of our conference is Transcending Today and Transforming Tomorrow. And we've heard talks about, they've included racism and prejudice. Other workshops and talks include burnout, retention of staff, childhood mental health, addiction, corrections, suicide, artificial intelligence. I'm not quite sure how that fits in, but how many of them are mentioning spirituality? My claim, and we can talk about it, is that spirituality is a solution for almost all of the problems that we're talking about. And I think I will be able to describe it so you can begin to see the broad-ranging implications for this. As I'm saying, New Jersey needs to wake up. There needs to be a spiritual awakening. And why New Jersey? We have an opportunity. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a map of the states in terms of suicide mortality by state. And let me click, and I will show you the rank order of the states. And you can't see this, but New Jersey has the least mortality rate of suicide in the nation, which means either we have lousy statistics or we're doing something right. So the opportunity is to do something in transforming New Jersey from a powerful beginning, not from it's broken, let's fix it. So I'm hoping that this will move us in that direction. Now, Normally, when we talk about spirituality, spiritual experience, we're talking about suffering. We need to transform that right away. And I'm going to start with a quote. You'll hear today, William James is my favorite author. Not God, but life. More life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life is in the last analysis the end of religion. The love of life at any and every level of development is the religious impulse. He uses the word religion the way I'm using spirituality. He just got it right, I think. Which brings us into happiness. The Greek word eudaimonia, Aristotle made it famous with his treatise on happiness, but the reason I include eudaimonia is when you look at the derivation, it comes from the Greek good, guardian, spirit. So didn't I tell you that I would show you the source of happiness is spirituality? Right there, from the beginning. I'm also going to ask you another question. If you had this, would you be happy? And I want you to seriously think about it. If you lived with self-confidence, lived with self-esteem, self-competence, being able to do effectively self-efficacy, if you lived by making choices with reason, if you lived with empathy and compassion, not just for others, but for yourself, and if you lived with courage and honesty to make the decisions and stand up for what needed to be stood up for, would you be happy? Think about it. We will get back to that. So, when we use the word spirituality, all kinds of things come up. So I want to be clear what I'm defining here. And I'm going to start with a quote, again, by William James, of what we refer to as an intense, almost conversion experience of spirituality. I had a vivid realization of forgiveness and renewal of my nature. When arising from my hands, I exclaimed, "Old things have passed away. All things have become new." It was like entering another world, a new state of experience. Natural objects were glorified. My spiritual vision was so clarified that I saw beauty in every object in the universe. The woods were vocal with heavenly music. My soul exulted in the love of God, and I wanted everybody to share in my joy. That is what James talks about as an intense conversion. Most people have what we would call an educational or a stepwise spiritual awakening. Many of you may be familiar with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are other ways that can move into spiritual awakening and spiritual experience progressively. So, just to be sure, what I am not talking about are psychic or paranormal experiences, often referred to as the Greek letter psi, telepathy, telekinesis, past lives experience, other dimensions or universes, mediums, alien abductions, afterlife, ghosts, demons, or even quantum entanglement. Those are the things that have come up when you just mention the word spirituality. I'm talking about a very specific understanding of the spiritual experience that is real and comprehensible. So, let me tell you what I mean by that. But before I do that, I want to ask you, who here would say that you have had what you would call, in your own terms, a spiritual experience? Your definition. Raise your... Okay. In most audiences, it's about 25 to 40%, depending on what the audience is. All right? And so let me show you my definition. There are hundreds of definitions. I use a functional definition that I've used for years. The quality of the relationship to whomever or whatever is most important or supreme in life. And the reason I use this is it points out several things. Spirituality is a quality. That's what makes it ineffable, hard to put into words. Try to put the quality of soft into words. Not easy. It isn't a thing. It's a quality. And it's a quality of a relationship, which is critical to spirituality, to whatever is supreme or most important. And probably any of you that have had a spiritual experience, my guess is it is characterized by at least one or more of these characteristics. Characterized by a sense of connectedness, maybe with something outside of yourself, a higher power or something, an aliveness that wasn't there minutes before it, a wholeness, a sense of integrity. There is usually an emotional component of peace or serenity. It may be joy or awe, depending on the context. And there's usually a new meaning and purpose. Almost anyone with a spiritual experience has at least one or more of these characteristics. Almost anything we do in life that empowers or brings us to these areas is beginning to verge on the spiritual, or the spiritual and religious. So it may not even be connected intentionally, but when you empower connection, when you empower wholeness, when you empower peace and serenity and meaning and purpose, you're in the spiritual domain. Actually, before I get to this, that's what I'm going to talk about, but I actually want to share a little bit about where I'm coming from, okay? Because there are so many questions and so many doubts when we talk about spirituality that you need to know where I'm coming from. And my journey started in a strange beginning. I was a resident in psychiatry. I did it at NYU in Bellevue in New York City. And I was also in a psychoanalysis at the time. And one night, I suddenly wake up in a panic. I'm sweating. I had just been dreaming about this horde of women, naked, half naked, pursuing me in a frenzied, chaotic experience. And it was, oh my God, what is this? I calmed myself down, didn't know what to make of it, went back to sleep, and I woke up in the morning paranoid. I was terrified, almost in a panic, that something terrible was going to happen to me. I had to go to work that day. I was seeing patients, and I think back, I probably didn't say more than hello and goodbye to my patients because I thought they'd see where I was and what I was going through. Because I had to get through the day to get up to my psychoanalyst, Midtown Manhattan, and I remember I'm in New York City. I am walking with my back against the walls of the building, just looking to make sure I was safe. I get in the session. I'm afraid he's got cameras. He's going to call the police on me. But I've worked with him. I'm trustful. And believe it or not, by the end of the session, we had an understanding that it was strange to say, that I had broken through the classical Oedipal set of feelings because I had just had a new love relationship. And the Oedipal sense is you're going to marry, as a boy, you're going to marry your mom and your dad's going to kill you. And my father was a minister and sex was sin. Now, I was paranoid for the next 3 days, 24 hours a day. But at the end of that 3 days, I also learned, believe it or not, that Jesus Christ was my emotional brother. Religion and Christianity was our whole life. We had devotions in the morning, we had church a couple of times a week, and the whole community was surrounded in a Christian tradition. So I had just gone to hell for 3 days and was brought back to life. There is a non-ordinary set of experiences that come from our normal human development that we're trying to make sense out of. And that was the beginning. And later I had other types of more true spiritual experiences. And the problem is, people with spiritual experiences, often it's not understandable and it starts to get out of control. And it can become what we call a spiritual crisis and can get worse and become paranoid and panicky and become a spiritual emergency. And many of these people with spiritual emergencies end up having the police called, get involuntarily admitted to hospitals, forced medications. They have a diagnosis of bipolar and schizophrenia, and it's a tragedy, and it has to stop. And that's part of why we're developing a movie, because the knowledge of spiritual experience as a truly wonderful, transformative experience needs to be out in the public. Okay? There is something wrong with our system. This is a new book. I know the author, Rob Wypon, and I'll read the quote because it's humbling. Asylums are supposed to be in the past. In fact, more law-abiding Americans today are being involuntarily committed and forcibly treated for their own good than at any time in history. If even 1/10 of the data and information he has in that book is true, I'm mortified to be a part of the mental health system that he's describing. Now, as a person with lived experience of spiritual experience, I've also had experience in the mental health system. My father, midlife, developed a major depressive episode, became catatonic. The only way out was through electroconvulsive treatment, got on medications, and had a normal 25 years to the rest of his life. His sister developed manic episodes, got on lithium. The rest of her life lived a normal life. I don't usually reveal it, but I have been being treated for a major depressive disorder for 35 years, and I can lead a normal life. The world doesn't get that having a diagnosis of major depression, bipolar disorder, means we can still have a normal life. So there's spiritual stuff, there's mental health stuff, that's important. And the reason I talk about lived experiences, I'm going to say some things that you haven't heard today. Everything I say today has been challenged and confirmed. We're now working on a study at NJAMHAA, a men's long-term residential treatment program, men with chronic addiction, multiple treatment failures, years of incarceration. We have a specific psychotherapeutic intervention that promotes spiritual awakening in less than 8 weeks. We've been successful in doing it. We've had a replication of it so that we know it can be done, and we're waiting to process the data. So that by the end of this, the goal is you will see that spirituality and spiritual experience, the way I'm talking about it, is absolutely real and is very powerful. And all of this leads me to propose. That's all twisted around. You're all familiar with the biopsychosocial model of medicine. Began in 1977. It's sort of the foundation of all of our medical and mental health services, the idea that we have a biological, a psychological, a sociocultural aspect to our personalities, that when they are balanced in a certain way, we have health, right? What I'm going to show is that there needs to be something added, and that is the spiritual and religious component, and it is central in all of this. Whether it's the religious community, spiritual practices, and not even that, this is the spiritual and religious sphere. When we do what I'm talking about, we literally open what I'm referring to as a spiritual core that is in all of us, and it has to do with using reason, compassion, and courage, dignity, to empower ourselves self-confidence, self-competence, and self-esteem, and doing that opens a spiritual core, and the spiritual core I'm talking about is the source of health and happiness. Okay? We'll get to why that's so convincing. So this is what we're beginning to look at as proposing a new biopsychosocial spiritual model, because until medicine puts spirituality in a major position, and I think in the center, because I truly believe it is the part that's healing, we're not going to get much of a transformation. We're going to get a piece fixed here and there and there. We need a fundamental transformation in this. Another thing I want to get clear is language. Religion, spirituality, a lot of confusion. I'm using the term religion being an institutional aspect of beliefs and practices related to the sacred or divine held by a community or religious or traditional group. Where spirituality is a dimension of personal human experience related to the transcendent, sacred, or ultimate reality. It may develop individually or in communities and traditions. A person can be religious and spiritual, religion and not spiritual, spiritual and not religious, or neither. And another term you'll see in the research is religiousness. Beliefs and practices related to the sacred or divine that may not be related to a specific tradition. An example, some of you may meditate or do yoga and not identify with being Buddhist or Hindu. You may pray and not necessarily connect yourself with Christianity or Islam. So that there are practices that connect with spiritual experiences that may or may not be with a religious tradition. Now, here's where it all started. William James, again, my favorite author, An Unseen Order. Were one asked to characterize the life of religion in the broadest and most general terms possible, one might say that it consists of the belief that there is an unseen order, and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. This belief and this adjustment are the religious attitude in the soul. And again, he uses the word religious the way I'm using, the way we're using the word spiritual. He goes on to describe it as ineffable, hard to put into words, noetic, having revelatory importance, transient, short, passive, it just sort of happens. I am challenging that because it doesn't have to be transient and it doesn't have to be passive. We can actively and intentionally promote it. But what do I mean by an unseen order? Years ago, there was an unseen order in the objective world until Sir Isaac Newton identified that unseen order with the laws of gravitation and the laws of emotion. We've identified an unseen order. We call it the framework of spirituality in the subjective world of experience. And I'll show you how we get into that exploration. We're starting, all of you are probably familiar with CBT, cognitive behavior theory. This is grounded right from CBT, but takes it to another level. It goes from the thinking, feeling, and action of CBT to distinctions I'll talk about of self-worth, distinctions of dignity, and then it opens up an even greater level that we refer to as the creative forces, and I'll explain what we mean by that. There is an unseen order built into us, and we believe that we've actually identified it because we can replicate it, we can use it, we can predict things with it. Now, I said I might say some things you might find controversial. Well, one of the ways that we're finding this works, or why it's there, is If you do a dissection of the human brain in 3 different regions, there are a set of, these 3 regions have different cells, different function, look different, function differently, and we believe they come from different ages in our evolutionary history. You're probably familiar with the reptile brain, you might call it, unconscious, automatic, breathing, vomiting, heart beating, primarily fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. There's the limbic or midbrain, primarily with emotions, memories, and decisions. And the cortex, human cortex, primarily language and reason. We now have pretty good evidence that the human condition is this. We have 2 brain processors going on simultaneously, and they aren't well connected. We have a fast, unconscious, non-rational, probably limbic, and we have a slow, conscious, rational, probably more human. Okay? And because the older brain acts faster, here's what happens. Trauma occurs. The older brain makes a decision, reacts fast, it's irrational, I'm a failure. Why would a 10-year-old that is physically abused with no provocation come to the conclusion I'm a failure, right? That is totally irrational. There are reasons that animal brain makes that kind of decision. But what happens is our human brain doesn't even know that decision was made. And that animal brain, that mammal brain, controls our actions based on that decision. And our cortex has no awareness, but things are happening. We're doing things and feeling things that we don't quite understand. But what does our human brain have to do? It has to adapt to these feelings and decisions by changing behaviors, defense mechanisms, drugs, money, power, rituals, belief. That's the human condition. Okay? Now, let's tell you what we can do about it. CBT, you're all familiar. We start with thoughts, feelings, and actions. We can carry this to the next level where we look at beliefs, values, and habits. Now we're in the religious domain, the religious identity. However, there's a problem with this that we're only now learning. Each one of these beliefs only usually encompasses 2 out of the 3 domains, meaning a belief can be a thought and a feeling. Someone can believe in the equality of all people and then go out and be racist and prejudiced. There is an implicit, there is an explicit and an implicit part to those words themselves. Same thing with values. Someone can value taking care of others at the expense of themselves. They're doing it, they're thinking it, because a value is so egocentric, we don't even feel our values, we just do them until they're challenged. And you challenge what is being sacrificed, and then all hell breaks loose. The same finally with habits. A habit is an action, a feeling, and there's almost no brain, especially as we see in addictions. Because of the repetitive behavior of reinforcement, at a certain point, it really is out of awareness, unconscious. So, that's where CBT stops. That's where DBT stops. If we move and integrate thoughts, feelings, and actions, what we call the domain of being, we're moving into a whole other way of doing psychology. The approach uses what we call an attitude, because an attitude is an integration of a thought, a feeling, and an action. For instance, well, I'll give you the first attitude we have to always deal with. Our culture has an attitude that you are what you feel. Me, I blame Madonna. You know, express yourself, right? So one of the first things we do in all of our work is to change the attitude to you are not what you feel, but you have feelings. And you have thoughts, and you have urges to act, and you have the ability to make a choice as to which one of those you empower. Transforming from the very beginning, but a necessary first step in all of the work we do. Just to get back to what we mean attitude, I'm going to give a couple examples, especially one. Pessimistic attitude. A thought, this won't work. A feeling of hopelessness or disappointment. An action of avoidance, withdrawal, or hesitation. Other attitudes we come across. You come across them all the time in clinical work. I already know what you're talking about, right? This is all wrong, the defiant attitude. The faith doesn't get you anywhere, bad things still happen. You ever hear that one when you're talking about spirituality? Hopeless, I couldn't possibly live like that, it's too hard. This is the one that gets most people stuck. I'll believe it when you prove it. And then we hope to have, sometimes we'll find someone with openness. I have a lot of mixed feelings about religion, spirituality. I'll take another look. And what we love to see is, I know what this is about. This is great. Enthusiasm. Actually, enthusiasm, do you know what that comes from? The root entheos, in God. Anything enthusiasm is the beginning of getting near spiritual experience. So, I've mentioned several times worth and dignity. These are the distinctions, and I'm going to define them, I'm going to operationalize them, that we work with, beginning with worth. Definition of worth, the quality, again, a quality, ineffable, of a person or thing that lends importance and value measurable by the esteem in which the person or thing is held. Now, there are at least two ways we use the word worth that get everybody confused. There is the worth of being. All people are worthy of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is unprovable. It is an axiom. In fact, would human beings have worth if we were not human? Right? The answer to that is as enigmatic as the question or the answer to what is the sound of one hand clapping? You can't answer that because the definition of clapping has two hands. You can't answer this because the definition of human worth involves being human. We will be talking about worth as an experience of being defined as self-worth, operationalized as, in each of the CBT domains, self-confidence, self-esteem in the domain of thinking, self-competence in the domain of doing. Each of these has been psychologically researched and measured. We know it is developmental, beginning with babies just do, competence. 3 to 4, they start to get aware of their emotions more. 5 to 7, the brain myelinizes, it speeds up. We develop self-confidence, we become Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, right? And then only gets integrated as the experience of self-worth in late latency, okay? We've also identified shame is not just a feeling. Shame is the experience of our total being of damage to self-worth, because shame makes us feel unworthy. Dignity. The quality, of course you would expect, the quality of being worthy of esteem or honor. Dignity is about honor. Now, the whole world, there are books and books about dignity, and they all do two things. They use dignity as a noun, something we have, and they confuse dignity with worth all the time. It's really a problem. In this whole approach, we do not use dignity as a noun. Dignity is an expression of what is it that we honor most about being human in each of these domains. And in the domain of thinking, what we honor most is reason, right? Beginning with our capacity to make choices, through experience, it gets extended socially as wisdom. In the domain of thinking, feeling, what do we honor most? Who are you going to ask? You're going to ask the Dalai Lama. Compassion, beginning with empathy, because we have language, we have mirror neurons, we have an incredible capacity for empathy. And this expands to, oh, you can't even see that. I didn't realize we were cutting off. Oh, nope, that's the system. Expanding to caring and justice in the social domain. And when we look at what is it in human experience that we honor most about action, it is courage. Being able, with our knowledge of consequences, to give our life for something. It begins with honesty with self and others. The foundation of social reality extends socially to giving and generosity for human flourishing. We don't quite see that there. And as with shame, we've learned that guilt is not just a feeling. Guilt is the total experience of damage to human dignity. How do we know that? What happens when you feel guilty? I should have made a better choice with reason. I should have had more empathy and compassion. I should have had more courage and been honest to stand up for myself. That's guilt. Damage to all of the experience of dignity. So, why are these two distinctions so important? When we strengthen self-worth and dignity and process the way we've learned to process it, something happens. There is a spontaneous opening to spiritual experience. Now, lately I've had to add another arrow because psychedelics open the spiritual core first. And when you look at the research on psychedelics now, they all get to self-worth and dignity from the psilocybin or MDMA ecstasy experience. So we're talking about the same spiritual core that we're still trying to understand, but what we know is that it's real. So getting back to the order, we've got CBT framework, self-worth, dignity. We empower self-worth and dignity. It opens up a whole new level of awareness we refer to as the creative forces or creative openings. Why? When this happens, it's powerful. It is forceful. And we'll talk about how that happens. The 2 minutes? Okay. The process goes like this. Our mammal brain is always trying to say, here are memories, here are feelings, wake up and fix me. The human brain experiences as what? Anxiety. Too much, I can't handle it, suppress it. So what we do, and many of you are doing this, you use mindful self-awareness to get back in touch with those feelings and memories and emotions with no judgment. Our human brain, that judgmental quality is what puts us to sleep. When we get rid of the judgment, we can open to acceptance with self-forgiveness, with self-compassion. And what's amazing that people don't know yet, when we can hold those experiences without judgment, our brain deconditions. The hurt disappears. I don't care how many years you've had. Memories stay, but the hurt disappears. It's almost like a miracle. And how do we know it? Gratitude and peace open up. The spiritual core has us with an increased sense of worth and dignity. How much time do I have?
20 minutes.
Oh, okay, that's good. I'm glad I'm not that far. I said, I hope I'm not that far off. So that's the process. And there are 3 keys to spirituality. one in each one of these domains. The first one, open-heartedness. Openness to all feelings without judgment. Okay? Pretty typical. Next is open-mindedness. Openness to multiple hypotheses, especially those that we don't live with, new ones, without judgment. This is where most people in our culture get stuck. Because here's what happens. They ask the question, I don't understand this, therefore it's not true. I have never experienced it, so it can't possibly be true. I'm 50 or 60 years old and I haven't had one of those experiences, so the rest of these people must be delusional. They're hallucinating. This is what brings spiritual experience into the realm of mysticism. Now, by mysticism, I don't mean magic. I don't mean witchery or whatever. Mysticism, by definition, asserts the attaining of truths through intuition, intuition being learning something without the conscious use of reasoning. So when we talk about the mystical experience of spirituality, it truly is. By definition, we learn something without reason. No one can get into this openness to spiritual experience through understanding first. It's impossible. Third, here's what happens. When you open-hearted, what opens that's so powerful is love. But this is not love like an emotion. It's not love like a commitment, like I love you. This is love like the Greeks described it, agape, the love of God, the love of the divine, that expansive, all-encompassing, compassionate love and connection to life. When we are open-minded, we open a truth. Now, this is not truth like right or wrong or good or bad. Mahatma Gandhi talks about the satyagraha, the truth force. It was the foundation of his non-violent approach to life and activism. And what it is we have a built-in truth force that is a gut reaction to whenever worth and dignity are violated. And all of you felt that when you saw George Floyd lose his life at the hands of violence. That's the truth force. It's in everyone. It may get damaged, it may get suppressed, but it's the moral foundation in our being. Third, finally, open-handedness. Openness to reaching out to give help or to get help without judgment, again and again. It gets slapped, it gets humiliated, it gets spit on. I learned the lesson, I stick it out again. And I stick it out again. That action of open-handedness opens faith. And this is not faith like a belief. We're not talking about that. This is faith like an action. I talk with you at length, but our brains are wired for the faith experience. I'll give you an example. Every one of you go to bed at night with 100% faith that you're going to wake up in the next morning. You step out of the door of your house in the morning, you have 100% faith that you're not going to fly off the face of the earth because we're whirling around at 25,000 miles an hour. There are hundreds of things every day that our mind has to take care of out of awareness. That's why we have this faith process built into us. And it gives us the opportunity to live like this. By jumping across a chasm with no guarantee that we're going to make it to the other side, and no guarantee of what we're going to find when we get there. That's living with faith. And when people live with this, and we train people to take on projects like this, It truly, believe it or not, it is a faith to move mountains. It's an amazing process to watch, and maybe we'll have time to talk about it. That's why spiritual experience is for real. Absolutely no doubt, we understand, we can process it, we can promote it, we can all learn how to tap into it. So this is the unseen order that when we, and I'll summarize, when we use reason, compassion, and courage, dignity, to strengthen self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-competence, we open this spiritual core, which is the source of healing and happiness. It is as powerful as Newton's laws of gravitation and motion. There really is the opportunity for a real, non-pie in the sky transformation. Alcoholics Anonymous discovered it years ago. I love these quotes. Our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. The essence of spiritual experience, God consciousness. And I really like this next one. This is right out of the big book. We were rocketed, creative force, into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. That's the spiritual awakening of AA. Now, when that spiritual core opens, remember I mentioned mystical? Whenever you're looking at any of this research of the psychedelics, they talk about a mystical experience. When that spiritual core opens, there are what we call mystical experiences. And there is a sense of connectedness that's grand, connected to almost everything, to yourself, your past, people, the world, nature. There is a vitality that wasn't there 5 minutes before, and it is extremely powerful. There is a sense of wholeness and unity. There's a transcendence that may be coming from out there, or an immanence coming from inside here with a higher power. There's a communion. There is the serenity and peace and joy and awe, and there is a change in thinking. The mind goes on overdrive. It is clear in its thinking. That's why we call it a spiritual awakening. We believe it's the source of creativity and the source of the aha experience. There is a certitude that when any of you that have had a spiritual experience, wasn't it more real than life? There is a certitude in the experience because it's a guide that tells you you're on the path. Listen and follow it. There's always gratitude. You start to have experiences in your life be what we call synchronicity. You're working on a project, you have a problem, and all of a sudden you hear on the radio the solution to your problem. You see a book that has the answer. It's as if something or someone is guiding our life. It's almost an uncanny experience we don't quite understand yet. It is revelatory, it is mystical, we talked about, and the source of meaning and purpose in our life is in our spiritual core. We've talked about how self-worth and dignity get damaged. Our purpose is when we find that thing in life that totally fulfills and completes all the hurt, and we are whole. When you find that, you will have found your mission. And at all of this is the source of happiness over time, because none of this happens in one swift event. It's over, and I can't tell you. For 30 years, I had progressively intense spiritual experiences, opening deeper and deeper levels of just understanding and where I came from. And the experiences can be, let's say, confusing, overwhelming, panic attacks that come out of nowhere. But there's always a reason that we can understand and use to transform our life. Happiness, the experience of happiness and wholeness is not cortical. We can have success, we can have achievement, we can have accomplishments, we can even have contentment. But the source of the emotional experience of happiness is in that spiritual core. Again, making it, I forgot to remember that? Right? If you had this, would you be happy? If you said yes, well, what are we talking about? Spirituality. The source of happiness is that spiritual core and this strengthening of self-worth and dignity. Truly, truly for real. Now, how much time do I have? Good, perfect. I want to end with something that is a very serious concern. I don't know if, is there anyone here from the Department of Children's Services or adolescents? I mentioned that self-worth is part of latency age, children until the age of 10. Dignity is what develops during adolescence. When our brain, our hormones go into super drive, when our brain rearranges itself, we have a greater opportunity for making choices with reason. When our emotional life is expanded, we have a greater opportunity for empathy and compassion. And socially, we have many more opportunities for courage. Dignity occurs and develops during adolescence. Now, how does our society deal with dignity? For 50 years, we have used Erik Erikson's stages of man. Adolescence is identity versus role confusion. We have research that shows the identity we explore, many behaviors and situations. At some point, we make a commitment to that part of our identity. At a time, we may reconsider it, and you go back over. And it can occur in multiple domains: gender, race, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic, vocational, national, political. But every domain, identity is about achievement. Now, what does identity and achievement always do? And we have been raised, this isn't just American, this is worldwide. Identity focus creates a me and another. And I think that's why the world is in the place it's in. We have battling identities, and the whole training about identity development has no real solution for what do you do when two strong identities disagree. Our social solution is violence and dominance and power. What if adolescence was about a commitment to the worth and dignity of every person beginning as soon as they turn 13? As soon as adolescence begins. And rather than identity achievement, what do we want? We want them to express the greatest part of humanity by making choices with reason, by living with empathy, true empathy for the others and for themselves, and compassion, and having courage to go into adulthood ready to do what needs to be done. Why is this so different? Spirituality always empowers the other. Identity separates. Spirituality always is inclusive. One of the papers I said, chatless and adolescent, there's a whole description of what if adolescence began with spiritual transformation, and then they could go into their identity development. Because their identity then would always include the other. So I just throw this out here. Any of you that really want to look at transforming society, we have to do something with our young people and our adolescents. And that's why this whole approach is for the future. I do think this quote is important. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. This is a new way of thinking that I think is a source of possible transformation. And as I say, it is real, it is available to all people. So what we've got is thinking, feeling, and doing, empowering self-worth and dignity, opening the creative forces. As we strengthen them, we open this spiritual core, which is the source of healing, which is the source of happiness, so that spirituality as a core of healing transcends today and transforms tomorrow. You like that, how I fit in? And I'll leave you with the unseen order is a gift from the universe. The grace that we have in life as being human. This is my contact information. I try to promote whatever I can in this area, and I'll leave you with my favorite quote. The highest spiritual practice is self-observation without judgment. How do we accept being human in all its good and all its bad, all its hurt, all its love? Okay? So, I'm done, and we have time? Do we have time? Oh no, we're way over.
No, we have 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
We only have 3 minutes, okay. Yes, yeah, I mentioned spiritual experiences that turn into spiritual crisis, spiritual emergency. That's why we're doing a documentary and we're doing a commercialized film. Many people are getting hospitalized. It's not fair. It should not be done. In fact, all of these mobile crisis services that you just heard about being developed, do any of them include spiritual competency? How do we know they're not messing up the opportunity in adolescence or adulthood to transform their life rather than label them and have something, medicate them? So speak with Janet. She's the director and developer of this. Other questions that people might have? I'm looking at you, and you're definitely attentive, and I could see some nods. What's up? What's questions?
I was going to say, we'll take one or two, given the time.
We will stay afterwards if you want to leave because of time.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And if you do have to go, leave me your card if you want to follow up with Dr. Calvin's slides or information. So I'll just take your cards and we'll follow up with you. So, yeah.
I just want to know if
We can give them the slides.
Leave your card
You give me your card.
so we can send them to you.
are you named after John Calvin?
Absolutely. My name is John Calvin. Yes.
I know, but I'm talking about the
I'm actually a junior. My father was John Calvin. He goes by John, so I had to go by Calvin. But yes,
John Calvin,
he was John Calvin Sr. Not the John Calvin. No, that's too late. Yes, I was. So somehow I guess I was meant to be in this domain. It's a whole fascinating story. Any other questions? Very good.
Welcome.
Thank you all for being attentive. I hope it fits with some of the things you're working with, and good luck in the work you do, and thank you for attending the workshop.